She stole from your own mother. My brother's voice cracked on the word mother, and the two detectives standing in my apartment doorway turned to look at me like I was something they had scraped off the bottom of a shoe. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there in my nursing scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic and 12 hours of a hospital shift, holding a mug of chamomile tea that was going cold in my hands. 72 hours ago, my brother wasn't calling me a thief. He was sitting at my kitchen table, crying, begging me to help him. He thought he had chosen the right person to take the fall. He forgot that I had spent my entire life watching him get away with everything. Watch closely. This is how I stopped letting him. It started on a Tuesday, which matters because Tuesday was the one day a week I slept past 6 in the morning. I was a night shift nurse at Mercy General, and Tuesday was my first full day off after 4 back-to-back shifts in the cardiac unit. I had turned my phone off, pulled my blackout curtains, and I was 11 hours into the best sleep I had gotten in 2 months when the knocking started. Not a polite knock. The kind of knocking that means whoever is on the other side has already decided they are coming in one way or another. I opened the door, and my brother practically fell inside. Daniel was 34, 2 years older than me, and for most of our lives he had moved through the world with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been told no and believed it. He was the kind of handsome that got him out of speeding tickets and into overpriced restaurants without a reservation. He sold commercial real estate, drove a car that cost more than I made in a year, and our mother, Patricia, had spent the last 3 decades making sure he knew he was her greatest achievement. That Tuesday, he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "I need you to keep something for me," he said, before I had even fully opened the door. He was already holding out a black laptop case, pressing it into my hands. "Just for a few days, maybe a week." I looked at the bag, then at him. "Good morning to you too, Claire." He said my name the way he always did when he wanted something, that specific flattening of the vowel that made it sound less like a name and more like a sigh of inconvenience. "I'm serious. I can't have this at the house right now." I set it on the counter and crossed my arms. "Why?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so practiced it had lost all authenticity. Rachel, his wife of 4 years, had been going through his things, he said. She was suspicious, paranoid, irrational. He was in the middle of a complicated deal, confidential client files on this laptop, and if she started poking through it and accidentally forwarded something or deleted something, it could cost him the whole contract. He just needed somewhere safe to store it while he figured out how to handle her. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because the honest answer is not flattering to me. I felt useful. That is the particular poison of being the family fixer. Not that you enjoy the chaos, but that you have been so thoroughly trained to find your value in solving other people's problems that being chosen, even to absorb someone else's mess, registers somewhere in your chest as warmth. I had been cleaning up after Daniel since we were children. When he crashed our father's truck at 16, and our father's temper was the kind that left marks, I was the one who said I had been driving. When he borrowed $3,000 from our mother's savings account to cover a bad investment and she started asking questions, I helped him construct the story about a bank processing error. When Rachel called me 2 years ago, voice low and tight, asking if I had noticed anything off about Daniel lately, I had said no. I had protected him from his own wife. I was not stupid. I want you to understand that. I was a registered nurse who had been keeping people alive under pressure for 7 years. I could read a monitor, anticipate a crash, stay calm in a code blue while everyone around me was falling apart. I was not stupid. I was conditioned. There's a specific and insidious kind of damage that gets done to the child who learns early that their safety depends on keeping the peace. You don't stop being intelligent. You start applying your intelligence entirely in the service of managing other people's emotions, and you get very, very good at finding explanations for things that should not require explanation. My brother was nervous. His wife was suspicious. Confidential work files needed to be protected. The logic had holes I could have driven a hospital gurney through, but my brain was already in fixer mode. already bleaching the floor before it thought to ask whose blood it was. "Fine," I said. 1 week. He hugged me. He smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. "You're the only person I can trust," he said, which I know now is the specific sentence that should have sent me to the front door to throw the bag into the hallway after him. He left. I went back to sleep. The laptop sat on my kitchen counter like a closed eye. For 3 days, nothing happened. I worked my shifts. I came home. I microwaved things and watched television and tried not to think about the bag on the counter. On the 4th day, my mother called. Patricia was 63, recently retired, and lived 30 minutes away in the house Daniel and I had grown up in. She called me every Sunday without fail, and it was a Thursday, which was wrong. "Have you spoken to Daniel?" she asked, and something in her voice was different. Thin, like a wire pulled too tight. I told her I had seen him earlier that week. She was quiet for a moment. "I've been trying to reach someone at the bank," she said carefully, "about the trust account, the one your father set up before he passed. I got a letter saying there were some recent transactions and I want to make sure everything is right." I told her I was sure it was nothing. I told her to call Daniel, that he handled those things. I told her not to worry. I was so good at finding explanations. 2 days later, the detectives were at my door. There were 2 of them. Detective Huang, a woman with a calm face and a notepad, and her partner, a man named Reyes, who looked at me with the particular blankness of someone who had already made up his mind. Behind them, in the hallway, was my brother. He was not in handcuffs. He was standing with his arms crossed and his eyes somewhere slightly above my head, and when I looked at him, he looked away. He told them I had taken his laptop, Detective Huang said. He told them it contained financial records. He told them I had accessed a trust account belonging to Patricia Marsh, our mother, and transferred funds over the course of 8 months. He told them I had a key to his home office, which was true, a key he had given me the previous spring when he and Rachel went to Portugal and asked me to water their plants. He told them I had a history of financial instability, which was a creative reading of the fact that I had once had student loan debt, a condition shared by approximately 45 million Americans. I stared at my brother over Detective Huang's shoulder. He was still not looking at me. The number they gave me was $260,000. That was the amount missing from the account my father had set up 30 years ago. The account meant to cover our mother's retirement, her medical care, the house. $260,000 moved in increments small enough to avoid automatic flags over the course of 8 months. My name was on the transaction records. I did not know how. I would spend the next several days understanding how. But in that moment, standing in my doorway in my scrubs with my cold tea, I did not know. What I knew was the specific gravity of the moment when every person in authority points at you and says you, and the part of your brain that has absorbed a lifetime of being told your reality is wrong begins to wonder, even for just a fraction of a second, if maybe they are right. I want to tell you I immediately asked for a lawyer. I want to tell you I was calm and collected and knew exactly what to do. I was not. I was a 32-year-old woman who had just worked 4 overnight shifts and opened her door to find her entire life being systematically taken apart. And my body did what bodies do under that kind of shock. It went very, very still. They asked me to come with them. I said nothing. They asked if I wanted to call someone. I said nothing. I got in the car and I sat in the back seat looking at my own hands, and I thought, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, of course. Of course it was me. I had always been the one they pointed at. I had always been the one who absorbed it. That is not weakness. I need you to hear me say that. That is what happens to the nervous system of someone who has spent decades being the designated problem. You don't fight because fighting was never an option that was available to you. You go quiet because quiet was the only thing that ever made the screaming stop. The interrogation room smelled like burned coffee and old carpet. Detective Reyes sat across from me and built his case the way you stack cards, methodically one on top of the other. The transaction records with my name, the access log showing my IP address had been used to log into the account portal. A recorded phone call, my voice, my phone number, of me telling someone the transfers were nearly complete and to get ready. I listened to that recording, my voice, my cadence. The specific way I say nearly, dropping the first syllable slightly. I had been on the phone with my mother 3 days ago and said that word, nearly, talking about nearly being done with a 12-day stretch of shifts. I understood then what Daniel had actually been doing for those 3 days the laptop sat on my counter. Waiting. Making sure the setup was complete. The laptop was not full of confidential client files. The laptop was the instrument, my Wi-Fi network, my IP address, the recordings he had carefully spliced and reconstructed from years of ordinary phone calls. He had handed me the evidence and asked me to babysit it in my own home, logged it into my network, and then reported it stolen. The fog lifted. Not gradually, all at once, the way a window clears when you wipe it. And what I saw on the other side of that glass was not a mess to be cleaned up. It was a crime scene, and I was not the perpetrator. I was the prop. I want a lawyer, I said. Right now. I'm not answering anything else without one. Reyes leaned back. Your brother is very concerned about you, he said, as though concern and accusation were the same gesture. Your mother is devastated. My lawyer, I said, or I have nothing else to say. I had a friend from nursing school, Priya, whose husband was a defense attorney. I had his number saved under Marcus, Priya's husband, in my contacts, the way you save numbers you hope you will never need. I called him from the interrogation room doorway, voice steady, hands not steady, and he was there within 2 hours. Marcus was the kind of attorney who walked into rooms and immediately changed the atmospheric pressure. He sat next to me, reviewed what they had, and asked Detective Huang a single question. Had they examined the metadata on the transaction logs, specifically the device IDs and the geographic location stamps on the access records? They had not yet completed that analysis. Marcus smiled. I'd like you to complete it before we go any further. Here is what they found. The IP address on the account access records was mine. The device ID was not. It was registered to a MacBook Pro, serial number logged to a purchase made 18 months ago, paid for on a card in Daniel's name. He had cloned my network address from inside my apartment during one of his visits, using a piece of equipment small enough to fit in a jacket pocket. Every access to my mother's account had been made from that laptop, which he had then handed me in my own home to sit on my Wi-Fi and complete the fiction. The recording was more complicated. Marcus brought in a forensic audio analyst within 48 hours who identified the splicing within 6 hours of examination. The rhythm was off. The background noise didn't match. Individual words had been lifted from different environments. Some from outdoors, some from what was identifiable as a hospital background, some from a home setting, and stitched together. Daniel had been building this for over a year. While Marcus was working my case, something else was happening. Something I had no knowledge of, in a house 30 minutes away with a woman I had spent 4 years dismissing. Rachel. I had never been unkind to Rachel. I want to be clear about that, but I had never been fully present for her either. When she called me 2 years ago with that tight, careful voice asking if I had noticed anything off about Daniel, I had said no and changed the subject. When she stopped coming to family dinners and my mother said Rachel was being difficult, I accepted that narrative because it was easier than interrogating it. I had categorized Rachel as Daniel's problem, the way I had always categorized Daniel's life as something I was peripherally responsible for managing. What I did not know was that Rachel had been quietly, systematically, documenting my brother for 14 months, not because she had a plan, because she was scared. Because the first time Daniel stood over her in their kitchen and told her that if she ever spoke to her sister again, he would make sure everyone knew what she was really like, she went upstairs, hands shaking, and wrote it down in a notes app on her phone with the date and time. Because the second time, and the third time, and the time he moved money out of their joint account and told her she had done it herself and she had stood in their bathroom genuinely uncertain for a moment whether she was losing her mind, she wrote those down too. Because Rachel had been living inside the same architecture of manipulation I had been raised in, and at some point, survival instinct had overridden the conditioning and she had started keeping receipts. She had the originals of the financial records. She had emails. She had a conversation recorded on her own phone, Daniel, on the phone with someone, saying my name and the word fall guy in the same sentence, 3 months ago. She had gone to Detective Huang the morning after Daniel reported his laptop stolen, not to protect me. I want to be honest about that too, because I think she deserves the honesty. She went because Daniel had told her the night before that when this was over, he was going to make sure she was implicated too, and she realized she had finally run out of time. But she went, and she brought everything. I was sitting in a waiting area outside the detective's office when the door opened and Rachel walked in. She looked like she hadn't slept in longer than I had. There were shadows under her eyes, and she was wearing a coat that was slightly too big for her, like she had grabbed someone else's off a hook. She stopped when she saw me. We looked at each other. Neither of us had the right words for it. We were two women who had spent years on opposite sides of the same man's narrative, and we were only now, in a police station waiting room, beginning to understand what we had actually been standing in. She sat down 1 seat away from me. After a while, she said, "I should have called you back. 2 years ago, when you didn't want to hear it, I should have tried again." I looked at my hands. I should have listened the first time. We sat there in silence for a while longer. That was enough. Daniel was arrested that afternoon. The charges were extensive: elder financial abuse, wire fraud, identity theft, computer fraud, filing a false police report. My mother's trust account had been drained by $260,000. What remained was enough to cover about 18 months of her current expenses. When Detective Huang told my mother what had actually happened, I was not in the room. Marcus had advised me to let the detectives deliver that information without my presence. I think that was right. Some things need to be heard without the person you wronged standing in front of you, because the grief and the guilt can get tangled together in a way that makes it hard to process either one cleanly. My mother called me that evening. She cried for a long time. She did not make excuses. She did not try to explain or minimize. She just cried, and I listened. And at some point she said, "I didn't protect you. I didn't see what I should have seen." And I said, "I know," and I meant it. And it was not an absolution, but it was a beginning. I did not offer her a permanent no contact. I am not the same story as the person before me. My mother had her own blindness, her own failures, her own complicity in a dynamic she benefited from emotionally even as it damaged me. But she was not a predator. She was a woman who had loved the wrong version of her son for too long and refused to look at what was real. That is a different kind of failing, and it has a different kind of path forward, and we are still, carefully, walking it. Daniel pled not guilty. His attorney tried to argue that Rachel had fabricated the recordings. The forensic analysis made short work of that. He was convicted on 6 of the 7 charges and sentenced to 11 years. The court also ordered him to make restitution to our mother's trust account, a process that will take the rest of his working life, assuming he ever works again. Rachel divorced him while he was awaiting trial. I helped her move into her new apartment. We are not close, not yet. But we talk. We have coffee sometimes. There is something between us that does not have a name yet, built out of shared surviving and the particular understanding of two people who were inside the same house of mirrors and got out. The malpractice settlement from the false police report, combined with what the court ordered returned to me for damages, was enough to pay off the rest of my student loans and put something aside. I kept nursing. I still work the cardiac unit at Mercy General, still do my night shifts, still have Tuesdays off, and turn my phone over on the pillow and sleep until 10 in the morning if I can manage it. My mother is doing all right. We are working on the trust account together. She has a financial advisor now, someone outside the family, and she calls me on Sundays the way she always has. But the conversations are different, slower, more honest. She told me recently that she was seeing a therapist, which is the most hopeful sentence she has said to me in my adult life. I think about the moment I stood in my doorway in my scrubs and felt my mind try to accept what was being said about me. I think about how close I came to not asking for Marcus's number. I think about Rachel sitting in a coat that didn't fit her, 2 years of documented evidence in a folder on her phone, and I think about how many times I had not answered her call. Here is what I know now. The conditioning does not disappear just because you understand it. I still feel the pull of it, the reflex to absorb and explain and smooth over. But I know now what that pull is and where it came from, and knowing gives you a second of space between the feeling and the action, and 1 second is enough to ask for a lawyer, to say I want to see the metadata, to sit down one seat away from someone you should have listened to years ago and say I should have listened. 1 second is enough to stop being the fall guy and start being the witness to your own life. If you have someone in your life who keeps handing you things to hold, who calls only when they need something absorbed, who has trained you to find your worth in being useful to their chaos, you already know. You have always known. The part of you that went quiet in the doorway knows. That part is not stupid and it is not weak. It is just waiting for 1 second of space. Give it the second. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if this story sat somewhere in your chest a little heavier than a story should, I'd like to know I'm not the only one.